So we're in Luke chapter 6, verses 12 through 16. And so I only have 4 verses to cover this morning. And I see Steve over there saying, yay. Thank you, Steve. Unfortunately, I put together just less than 10 pages on these 4 verses. And so I'm going to do my best to get through this in a timely manner. That was a nervous laugh. Anyway, here we go. I've been so encouraged to be in the book of Luke in this season. We're not going to, obviously we've already passed the birth of Jesus, and here we are going into the Christmas season, and I preached on the birth of Jesus in July, I think, which is just, sacrilegious. I don't know. You're not supposed to do that, but we did it, and it was fun, and it was exciting. But here we are in Luke 6, and Jesus has been messing about. He's been, if you've heard us in the last couple of weeks about what we've been talking about Jesus, he has been really causing some waves where the teachers of the law are there and the doctors of the law, and he's messing with their idea of the Sabbath. And we've had a lot of good time looking at what is the significance and meaning of the Sabbath. And if you haven't heard our last few teachings, I would encourage you to listen to last week's as we were talking about the Sabbath. It's a good teaching on theologically where the Sabbath fits into our lives now. But we're moving now into a space where there's a narrative that talks about something that Jesus was doing. And in this narrative that we're about to jump into, Jesus chooses, according to Luke's story, he chooses the 12 disciples. It's pretty cool. So we're going to look at that today, the 12 disciples. And as I was looking at it, I only had 4 verses. I thought, well, what do I do with this, and how do I preach on this, and how does it fit into our lives? Where are we in the story is kind of the question that I keep asking, and not wanting to define the scriptures from our point in history, but to understand the scriptures from what they meant in the point in time in which they're speaking to. This was 2,000 years ago. But amazingly enough, this little passage of Scripture, these 4 verses where Jesus goes and prays and then chooses his disciples, has had an impact from that day until now. And so I'm just going to look at the disciples this morning. But let me read to you Luke chapter 6, verses 12 through 16, and then we'll just get at it. All right, here we go. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated as apostles. Verse 14, Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon who was called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Wow, there is so much in these 4 verses, because as I said those names, there's different portions of the Gospels that tell us how each of those guys were called to follow Jesus and how they became disciples. But as it starts in verse 12, it says that on one of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent all night praying to God. Jesus, the Son of God, one of 3 parts of the Trinity, living in human flesh, finds himself about to engage in a very important responsibility, and that is to choose 12 apostles. And so when he's making a big decision, he goes and has a hamburger and chills out. No, it's not what he does. I don't even know if they had hamburgers back then. But he separates himself, goes to a mountain, and prays. And there's a lot of question about, did he go to a place that was prepared in this mountainside? Because the doctors of the law, the Pharisees, what they would do is they would have a place that they would go and set up like little platforms. They would actually mortar a little platform in a place and kind of make out a wall or somewhere where they could kind of put their face into this wall or this mortared space in the mountainside that was secluded. But this particular passage seems to mean that Jesus went at night to a secluded place that was familiar to him, where he began to pray in such a manner to supplicate, is the word that comes when we talk about prayer, a place of supplication. It was a place in the mountains without question that Jesus had selected for the purpose of solitude, so that he would not be interrupted, or there would be very little interruption. The word supplication means to be humble, earnest, to be focused yet active, reverent, specific, devout. He's not praying over his French fries, okay? He's having serious prayer. All right, this is a time of prayer where he's very focused, and he is engaging with God the Father, his Father. It says that he spent all night praying to God, that he was directing his prayers to the Father very specifically. Later on in this sermon this morning, we're going to look at the contrast from this moment, where Jesus is first thinking about his disciples, this band of people that are following him. You see, disciple means a student of. And Jesus had these devoted disciples who were following him. But disciple basically means learner, and it's one who puts themselves under the teaching of and is much like a servant. Someone who just goes, I'm sold, I'm all in, and I want to follow this person, and I want to make this person my teacher, my rabbi. I'm going to separate myself from the common things in life, and I'm going to say I am following this person for a season so as to learn from them, their life, their doctrine, their lifestyle, their worldview, so to speak. But in this moment, he was looking at the disciples, and he was going to choose apostles, and specifically 12 of them, which is interesting because as we look at 12, obviously in the history of Israel, there were 12 heads of the families of the children of Israel, and now here is Jesus. Really, as we know, because we know the whole story, he is the King of the Jews. He is the Messiah. He is from the tribe of Judah, but he chooses 12 apostles. Pretty awesome. So in the choosing of the apostles, these disciples are going to shift from being wholehearted following disciples, students of, to now being chosen by that teacher for him to say, you are my emissary. You are my ambassador, so to speak. You are the one who is going to go for me with my intention, with my words, and my authority. That's a big difference from disciple, right? But he's choosing these 12 in this moment, and he does it by prayer. So cool. Clearly, you could put yourself in the story right here. Anytime you need to make a big decision, it's a good idea to do what Jesus did and to pray. You can make your pros and cons sheet, right? You can do a spreadsheet. You can look at it from every different direction like you're doing a Rubik's Cube or whatever. But don't just go by the data. In this moment, Jesus is giving us an example that prayer is very important and God cares. God has an idea, and he wants to know if you're interested in what his ideas are. And so as those who, us who have been invited into this relationship with Jesus, much like you've already heard as Sarah gave an altar call today to literally come to Jesus with all of our lives. We know what that means, that now what should be taking place in our lives when we enter into that relationship with Jesus is that prayer is the number one way that we engage God, right? Number two is reading of the Word, clearly, because his Word reveals himself, his nature, his character, his will, and his ways are all revealed to us in the scriptures that he's given us. But there's something about prayer. and specifically, you are so lucky to live in Lake Tahoe, where we can just turn around and go right outside our door within just moments and find ourselves in a solitary place where we can look at the beauty of God's creation and immediately engage with that Creator God. We're spoiled. We're spoiled. We're spoiled. We should pray. Okay. So the 12, let's look at their names real quick. They're going to become familiar to you. You're going to go, oh yeah, I know those. Or you're going to go, I don't remember that guy. I don't even know who you're talking about. But my first slide here is Simon Peter. We know that guy, right? Simon, who Jesus named as Peter. Andrew, James, John, right? Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas. James, son of Alphaeus. Simon the Zealot. Judas, son of James. And then finally, Judas Iscariot. These 12 were chosen in this moment. And what I've decided to do is that I'm going to run through real quick a little bit of their story and try and get done in enough time, because what I want to do at the end of this time together, as I'm closing up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you what I call the authority of their testimony. All right? The authority of their story. Now, this is the beginning of when they're called, but I'm going to jump right into each name and give you a little history, both the biblical history, and then for some of them, we don't know much about them. And so then there's what's called rabbinic tradition, which tells us what might have happened in their lives. But then there's also just a historical tradition, which is even outside of biblical tradition and rabbinic tradition, but it's just historic tradition of the times. So in the 1st and 2nd century, there were historians that wrote about these men, and those historians were doing it for the purpose of just writing down a history. One of the historians was the 3rd century early church father, and he wrote down what he believed from his time in the 3rd century. Looking back to the 1st century, he wrote down about 50 names that he thought were the most important people that we should know about in the advent of Christianity, as Christianity was growing as a religion, as a faith. And so he wrote down these 50 characters, and within his writing of those 50 characters, he touched on several of these disciples. And so there's multiple sources where we get the story of what happened in these people's lives, and some of it's tradition and some of it's scripture. And so I'm just going to jump in and give you some of that real quick. All right? So here we go. We're going to go through the 12 really, really, really fast. Simon Peter. We know Simon. We've already talked about him, right? Luke 11, Luke 5, verses 1 through 11 is where Jesus says, why don't you cast out your net on the other side of the boat over there, right? And he sends them out after they had toiled all night fishing. And if you remember, Peter was that fisherman who was like, yeah, no fisherman goes fishing in the afternoon after 12 noon when the sun is high in the sky. And Jesus goes, I want you to go out. And so Peter goes, real loud and real boisterous, like, so all the other fishermen hear him. Okay, at your word, Mr. Teacher, not fisherman, carpenter, I'm going to let out my nets for a catch, even though I just fixed them. And he does it, and in his obedience, obviously, he catches such a great number of fish that not only does his boat begin to sink, but his partners come and their boat almost sinks. And so at that moment, he turns around and says, get away from me, right? For I am a sinful man, Lord. He calls Jesus Lord in that moment. So, when you catch that major fish, those that are fishermen understand what was going on in Peter's head, Simon's head, right? So, interesting enough, Simon Peter, he gets his name because he gives that great confession at Caesarea Philippi. If you remember, what happens is that Jesus goes to this region called Caesarea Philippi, which is just above Lake Gennesaret. And there's 4 headwaters that come into one stream that then goes into that lake. And in that place, it's kind of a hill country because the streams are coming into it, and it's elevated up above the region. And what happens is Jesus takes his apostles with him at that moment, right? He's already chosen them as apostles, but he takes them with him, and as he's in this area with the 12, he goes, hey guys, who do people say that I am? And the backdrop is like this. In that elevated area up in the foothills as the waters are coming down, there were shrines to all kinds of gods. And I like to imagine that it was kind of dusk or getting into nighttime, because what would have happened is that there would have been candles and fires burning in all of these different little shrines that were to different gods. And Jesus sets himself up with his disciples with a backdrop of all the famous gods, little g, of that time, all the idols of that time. And he begs the question to his disciples specifically, who do people say that I am? And the disciples go to say, oh, well, some say you're this, and some say you're that. Some say you're Elijah. Others say you're, a good teacher or a prophet. And he goes, yeah, okay, but who do you say that I am? And Peter at that moment, right, Simon at that moment, he goes, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Whoa. And Jesus just turns to him and goes, you know what? Flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, but you just prophesied. And upon this truth that you just said, and upon you, Simon, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And Peter goes, yeah, I know. But really, in that moment, what's taking place is that he goes, and you will be called, Simon, you will be called Peter, the rock, right? And so now, Peter in this moment goes, yeah, that's amazing. And Jesus goes, but listen, I don't want you to tell anybody this, but what's going to happen here in this ministry that we're doing, I'm going to be led to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be crucified, and I'm going to suffer. And Simon Peter goes, hey, time out. Never on my watch, dude. That's not going to happen. That's not what we're doing here. We're taking over. You're not going to die. We're going to set you up as king. And Jesus goes, excuse me, Satan. Get behind me. I know the will of my Father, and I came here to do his will. So from one point, he said, you are the one that I'm going to build my church on. And in the next moment, he calls him Satan. So Peter's all over the place. He's possibly that apostle that I identify most with. Right? He had the speak before you think disease, the foot in the mouth disease. He's also the one, Peter, James, and John, they were there at the transfiguration, right? And of course, Peter's the one who goes, this is amazing, let's build a temple. Well, a tent, tabernacle. He saw all kinds of things. He was also the one who received the Holy Spirit and preached at Pentecost and saw the first great awakening after the ascension of Christ. He was the one who in Acts chapter 10 received that dream where sheets are coming down from heaven with all kinds of animals on it, and literally Jesus says, rise, kill, and eat. And he goes, oh, I can't do that, because he's having that whole problem with the rules and the law. And Jesus is like, hey, look, whatever I call clean, you don't call dirty, right? By the way, I'm kind of like the king here, okay? So listen, what I'm trying to tell you. And Peter was kind of thick and slow to get it, but when he did get it, he really ran with it. Pretty amazing guy. It is said that he ministered in Antioch, Asia Minor, and in Rome, and ultimately at the end of his life, around AD 64, he was killed by Nero. Under Emperor Nero, he was killed because tradition tells us that basically there was the Great Fire of 64, which was July 18th of 64, according to history. Nero was about 35 miles away. He wasn't even in the city, but he blamed it on the Christians because everybody hated the Christians. And so what he did was that area that was burned for literally 6 days, they finally suppressed the fire, and then it came up for another 3 days, burned a major part of the city, and Nero comes in, and he blames it on the Christians, and then builds shrines to himself and beautiful colonnades to himself in that area that had been burned out. And so it's suspicious that he actually wanted that area and allowed the fire to happen somehow, or maybe he even, influenced that fire and then intended to blame the Christians for it, which caused a great persecution for the Christians. And under that moment and in that time, Simon Peter was then crucified upside down in Rome. What we're going to find out is that these guys that followed Jesus had a pretty rough time of it. And as I was studying this, I kept telling Sarah, I'm depressed. This is depressing me. This is intense. Look at the second name, Andrew. Andrew was actually a disciple of John the Baptist. And it's accounted for us in John 1, 35 through 42, that he was called during that time while he was following John the Baptist. He was also a fisherman with his brother Simon Peter, right? Tradition says that he ministered in Greece and Asia Minor, and that this guy, Andrew, he was actually crucified on an X-shaped cross. And some people say that there's an account where when he was being led to the cross, he exclaimed out loud, "A cross? I have lived for this cross my whole life." Almost with an anticipation to go to crucifixion for his testimony of Christ. Wow. Tradition says he was crucified on that X-shaped cross, stayed alive for 3 days on the cross, preached for 2 of those days, converted the Roman governor's wife, and then prayed for Christ to receive his soul and died. At one point, he was going towards, I said that, and he says, "This cross I have lived for my whole life." Andrew. Wow. Number 3, John, James, the son of Zebedee, or also known as James the Great, or James the Greater, because there must have been a littler James. He was also a fisherman. He was one of the sons of Zebedee, the brother of John, right, who we're going to talk about in a minute. The brother of John, James and John, the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, right? The interesting thing is that these 2 guys were actually kind of bad to the bone kind of guys. They were intense. They, probably these days would have been packing and driving big trucks. I'm not going to lie, they're pretty awesome, right? Because they were packing. Back in those days, they didn't have guns, but those guys were known to carry a short dagger just in case they had to do some business, right? And so these 2 guys, as the picture that's in your mind right now, you have to understand they were also mama's boys. Okay, which might be common for guys that are kind of BA. All right, they might also just always be mama's boys. How do we know they were mama's boys? Matthew 20, verse 20 through 24. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and said, kneeling down before him, and asked a favor of Jesus. And Jesus says, "Hey, what do you want?" At that moment, what do you want? Wow, Jesus says. He asked, and she said, "Grant that one of these, my 2 sons of mine, may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." In verse 22, he says to her, with these 2 young men listening, he says this, "You don't know what you're asking." And then he stops talking to her and says to them, "Can you drink the cup that I am going to drink?" They said, "We can. We will." And Jesus says to them, you can just imagine him looking them dead in the eyes and says, "You indeed will drink from my cup." And then just kind of waited. "But to sit at my right hand or the left, that's not for me to grant." Wow. He says those 2 places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. And when the 10 heard about this, they were mad at those 2. You think? Tradition says that specifically James, he ministered in Spain, and then he was beheaded by Herod Agrippa. He's the first of the apostles to be martyred. In Acts 12:2, it says, it was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them, and he had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Wow. The tradition says this, that the soldier assigned to guard James was so impressed by James' steadfast faith and testimony that he then confessed to be a Christian himself. And as a result, both James and the guard were executed together. On the way to be executed, the soldier asked James to forgive him for the way that he had treated him and persecuted him. James then turns and kisses him and says, "Peace be with you." And then they're both beheaded. Wow. So his brother John is the one that we call John the Beloved. He wrote the Gospel of John. He wrote 1, 2, and 3 John, the letters of John, and he also wrote the revelation of Jesus Christ. Pretty significant guy. He's the only disciple who was not martyred for his confession of Christ. But he was exiled on Patmos. They tried to kill him. They actually dipped him in hot oil, burned his skin with hot oil, and he survived it, according to tradition. The only apostle believed to have actually died naturally. And we know John was the one whom Jesus said as he was dying on the cross, he says to John, speaking of his mother, Mary, he says to Mary and to John, he basically says, "John, here's your mother." Basically saying, your job, take care of my mom. Wow. That's a close friend, right? He was close with Jesus. Incredible. Philip, look at Philip. Philip, let's look at him. He was directly called by Jesus. In John 1, 43 through 46, gives the account. And we're going to kind of look at this a couple times. But he says, the next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee, and he found Philip. And he said to Philip, "Follow me." Imagine that. Jesus rolling around your neighborhood. "Hey, have you seen Levi? Hey, anybody seen Levi? Where's Levi?" Or Tyler. Can you imagine somebody going around your neighborhood, knocking on your neighbor's doors? "You know where Tyler lives?" Yeah, Jesus rolling around, looking for you, hunting for you. That's what was happening to Philip. He found Jesus, and he goes, Jesus finds Philip, and he goes, "Hey, Philip, come and follow me." And Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Verse 45, Philip found Nathanael. So Philip goes and finds Nathanael and told him, here's what Philip says first about Jesus. This is awesome. "We have found the one whom Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote. It is Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." He goes, Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter's son, is the one whom Moses wrote about in the law and whom the prophets wrote about. To which Nathanael goes, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from there?" Philip goes, just come and see. You got to see. You got to see. Right? So he brought Nathanael to Jesus. Wow. There's another place where Philip is mentioned, which is pretty cool. In John 14, verses 8 through 14, this is literally the day that Jesus is going, the day before, or the day of, the night that Jesus was going to be crucified, or betrayed by Judas. And he says this in John 14, verses 8 through 14, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be sufficient for us." Right? He literally says to Jesus, he goes, "Jesus, show us the Father, and then we'll be satisfied." And right there, remembering what Philip first said about Jesus to Nathanael, still, here he is 3 years later, and he says to Jesus, "Look, we'll really be with it. We'll understand what you're all about if you just show us the Father." And Jesus immediately turns to Philip and says, "Philip, don't you know me? Even after I've been with you for such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." And then he carries on. "Philip, how can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words that I say, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing this work." And he carries on and on and on. He just drives on Philip. I thought you got it from the beginning, man. Tradition says that he preached all over Asia Minor and that he was martyred or he was possibly either martyred by crucifixion and or stoning. And it was under the emperor of Domitian that he was martyred. Okay, Bartholomew or Nathaniel, right? Nathaniel's the one that said, what? Can anything good come from, right? He's a friend of Philip. He's a native of Cana. And so he goes, Philip found Nathanael and told him, this is verse 45 of John 1, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets had also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth, can anything good come from there, says Nathanael, come and see. Verse 47, when Jesus saw Nathanael coming, as Nathanael's coming towards him, Jesus begins to address him from afar off and says very loudly, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. It's like as he's coming right in front of Jesus, Jesus is saying this about him. And as he comes to his feet and is standing in front of Jesus, Nathanael's first words to Jesus are confronting him. You don't know me, man. How do you know me? He confronts him. Jesus goes, oh, know you? I saw you yesterday under that tree. Whoa. I saw you while you were still under that fig tree before Philip called you. That moment, just before Philip walked up to you, I saw you there under that fig tree. Immediately, then he says, Teacher, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. From confrontation to prophecy. From having the wrong attitude to immediately having an epiphany. Wow. I mean, this is radical for these guys. You got to understand. Every single person in this room has already asked the question, what was he doing under that tree? Who is he with? What was he doing? What was he thinking? Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under some fig tree? Listen, you're going to see greater things than that. Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man, which is literally Jesus' favorite address for himself, the Son of Man. Wow. Tradition tells us that he traveled to Armenia, India, and Persia. Traditionally, Bartholomew or Nathanael, as a missionary in Ethiopia, Mesopotamia, Turkey, Iran, all these areas, that as he was doing this ministry, he was martyred by a prince because he had actually converted a guy named Polymus. He had converted him to Christianity, and this made that guy's let's see, hold on. Oh, yeah, okay. So this guy's brother, Polymus's brother, who's a prince, his name is Astyages. He gets upset at what had happened here and that his brother had been converted to Christianity. And so he secretly puts a mark out on Philip's head. Or excuse me, on Nathanael's head. And he has him killed by filleting and then being beheaded. So what I mean by filleting is that he had guys capture him, take whips, like the whips that Jesus was whipped with, and they whipped him until he had no more skin, and then they cut his head off. Didn't end well for him, seemingly. But amazingly, he would not denounce Christ or his testimony of Christ. Matthew Levi, Sarah preached on Matthew Levi. He was the tax collector who then has a party at his house, right? And in Matthew 9:19, it says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth, and he said, follow me. And Matthew got up and followed him. And then later, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came from all over the area and had a party with him and the disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And this is where Jesus makes this incredible statement. He says, it is not for the healthy it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what it means when I say, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I do not come to call the righteous, but sinners. This is where Jesus makes the statement that he came for you. Wow. Tradition says that he too ministered in Persia and Ethiopia. There's no clear story really as to how he died. Some say he was burned, some say he was beheaded, some say he was stoned to death. But the most common tradition says that he converted a king named Aegilpus and all of his people in Ethiopia. Think about that. This guy goes to Ethiopia, converts a king, and the king's people all follow Jesus. That king had a daughter named Iphigenia, and Iphigenia dedicated herself to God also and promised him that she would be chaste until she was married, and really took a vow of chastity at that moment, which also made her uncle very upset because he wanted to get with her. And so he put a mark on Matthew's head, and he was killed by an assassin. Wow, who pierced him with a sword. Thomas, also called Didymus, I love Didymus, Thomas, the eighth apostle. He was called Didymus, which basically means twin, or they called him Ditto. You got to love that. Didymus basically means ditto, right? It's just hilarious when you see how these guys interacted with each other. They literally called him Ditto. Gosh. Let's see. So Thomas, called Didymus, is also known as Doubting Thomas, right? He's the one who makes actually one of the most profound proclamations of Jesus in the Gospels and in Acts. But basically, the book of Acts tells us that Thomas was so offended, if you will, by the murder of Jesus, and that he was buried in a tomb, that he said, when they said that he had raised from the dead, he said, listen, guys, no reason to tell fairy tales. I don't believe it. Unless I literally see, he was a practical kind of guy. He goes, I want to see him. I was there when they nailed him to that cross. I saw the wounds in his hands. I was there when the soldier pierced his side and blood and water poured out. I watched him die, you guys. Don't give me this resurrection story unless I see him and I put my hands and see the wounds. And then when Jesus shows up, he literally walks into the room where the disciples were locked in to hide themselves, and Jesus shows up and is eating fish. Right? And he specifically goes, hey, where's Thomas? And he goes to Thomas and he goes, hey, and I don't know that Thomas even needed to put his hands in the wounds, but he falls down and makes this declaration, my Lord and the God. Whew. He was, talk about epiphany moments, right? It says that he traveled to India and he angered one of the pagan priests, and those pagan priests had him imprisoned. And while he was being led to his place of execution, either one of the soldiers or a priest ran him through with a spear. Number 9, James, son of Alphaeus, James the Less, listed among the 12 in Matthew 10:13. There was very little recorded about James of Alphaeus, and he is not James, the brother of Jesus. It's a different one. But tradition says this about James, the son of Alphaeus. James made missionary journeys preaching in Judea, Edessa, what is now Gaza, proclaiming the gospel. It says that he was healing all sorts of sicknesses and diseases and converting many to the path of the salvation and preaching Jesus and his resurrection. Tradition says that he was then thrown off the pinnacle of the temple and brutally clubbed to death by a crowd. It said that he was also persecuted at the same times that James was persecuted. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Simon the Zealot, number 10, Simon the Zealot. Let's see, he ministered in Persia, Egypt. Some say that he made it as far as what is now Britain. This guy, Simon the Zealot, and Thaddeus or Judas, son of James, they actually traveled together. And these two guys, so I'm going to put these two guys together, Judas, son of James, and Simon the Zealot. They traveled together after they received the Holy Spirit. And while they were preaching, it says that they were martyred together. The two of them were most likely martyred together. For Simon the Zealot, he was clubbed to death or quite possibly axed to death. Whereas Judas, son of James, was sawn in half. Judas, son of James, is mentioned in John chapter 12, that same day where Philip was speaking up, right? Judas, son of James, speaks up, and it's recorded in John 14, verses 21 through 24. Jesus says this, "Whoever has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them." It's really one of my favorite scriptures where Jesus says, I will manifest myself to you if you obey me and love me. Then Judas pipes up, and Judas, not Iscariot, this guy, the apostle, he says, "But Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the whole world?" And Jesus just continues, and he goes, "Listen, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and I will come to them, and we will make our home with them. However, anyone who does not love me will not obey my teachings. And these words that you hear of me are not my own. They belong to my Father who sent me." So he's making a very clear distinction, and he says to this disciple, Judas, he says, look, all you have to do is love and obey. Wow. Tradition says that he was killed by pagan priests who incited a mob who subsequently murdered them with clubs and axes, and he was cut in half. And then, of course, there's Judas Iscariot that we don't need to talk too much about. Judas Iscariot, quite possibly, tradition says that he might have been a distant cousin to Jesus. We don't know, but that's what tradition suggests. But as he's the one who goes and kisses Jesus on the night that he was betrayed, it says that Judas was paid 30 pieces of silver for this betrayal. And scriptures tell us that he went back with those 30 pieces of silver and threw it at the Pharisees that basically incited him to betray Jesus. And then he went and hung himself. It's really sad. But you see, where we started was this, that Jesus prayed all night for these disciples. Scriptures tell us in John 17 that just before he was to be betrayed in John 17, Jesus prayed this prayer to the Father. He says, "I, Father, have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. They were yours, you gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. For I gave them the words that you gave me," said Jesus, as he's talking to his Father. He says, "and they accepted those words. They knew with certainty that I came from you, and that they believed that you sent me." Jesus is testifying of their faithfulness to him, to the Father. He goes on to say in John 17, verse 19, it's actually a very long prayer, so I'm cutting it up for you. He says about the disciples, he says, "I have given them your word, and the world has hated them. For they are not of the world any more than I am of the world, Father. My prayer is that it is not that you would take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth, Father. As you sent me into the world, I send them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may truly be sanctified. Jesus knew what he set these guys up to. He knew that, in fact, he says this in John 15, 18 through 20. He told them on the night that he was to be betrayed, he said to his apostles, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, and that is why the world's going to hate you. Remember that I have told you this, and remember that a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecute me, they will persecute you also. Wow. Jesus knew what was coming for these 12. But he said, Father, I sanctify myself that they too might be sanctified. Peter, upon who was called the rock, he wrote this in his first letter, 1 Peter 3:15. He said, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, always prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Basically, Peter, who knew he would eventually be martyred for his death because Jesus told him that day that he met him. It's recorded in John chapter 21 that Jesus, remember the famous part where Jesus says, Simon Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Simon Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. And he says, basically, Satan is asked to sift you like wheat. And Peter's like, well, gosh, that's not good. And Jesus doesn't go, but don't worry, I'm going to save you from it. No, it's not what he says. He says, I've prayed for you, that you'll be strong. Wow. What does it mean to follow Jesus? My goodness, I'm already done, and I've got 3 more pages to share with you. What do I do? Basically, their testimony is this, or really the meaning or the title of my message should be this: the apostolic strength. Apostolic. They are the apostles. The apologetic strength of the life and testimony of the apostles. The apologetic strength of the life and testimony of the apostles. I'm going to give you some slides very quickly. I'm just going to read them to you, take pictures of them. You won't have time to write it down. What do I mean when I say apologetic strength? The Apostle Peter says, always be ready to give a testimony for what and the reason that you believe. These 12 men, really the 11 of the 12 men, went to their death, never turning on Christ. Listen, people do not willingly die for what they know is a lie. Let me say that again. People do not willingly die for what they know is a lie. These apostles were firsthand witnesses to the events that they proclaimed. They were in a position to know whether Jesus actually rose from the dead or not. If the resurrection was fabricated, they would have been the ones who invented the lie. People may die for a mistaken belief, but people do not willingly die for what they know to be false. The apostles' steadfastness is not just sincerity. It's not sincerity about something that listen, it is a sincerity about something that they were in a unique position to verify, and they verified it with their lives. Point number 2, the apostles had no earthly gain. They had nothing earthly to gain, and they had everything to lose. The apostles' testimony brought them imprisoning, flogging, exile, torture, execution, loss of social status, and loss of their livelihood. That was their reward on earth. They did not gain power, wealth, political authority, social acceptance, or safety by the testimony that they lived and died for. Listen, it is unlike political or religious movements where leaders receive tangible benefits, right? Where they get, sometimes, political religious movements, leaders receive all kinds of good things. But the apostles, the only benefit that they had was proclaiming a message
that they were absolutely convinced was true. Each apostle faced death. Number 3, every apostle faced death independently, and they did not recount it. In other words, they didn't go as a group. They weren't holding each other accountable, right? Only 2 of them died together. All right, why is this significant? Because they suffered in different regions of the Roman world. They faced different rulers and different trials. They encountered pressure to recant every time, separately, not as a group. There is an incredible strength in this point that I'm making, and it's called multiple attestation. It's a principle. Independent, repeated willingness to suffer for the same core claim, in this case, Christ's resurrection and his lordship, creates an argument analogous to what is called multiple attestation. This is a principle in historical research. Every historian knows the strength of this argument, right? It is where several independent witnesses hold to the same testimony under threat. And that testimony and that pressure strengthens the reliability of their testimony. Point number 4, their testimony was public, not esoteric. What do I mean by esoteric? Because at that time, and even today, a lot of times when somebody wants to whoop up some kind of lie or draw people to themselves, they do it to an elite, gullible group. It's called Gnosticism, actually. But that's not how the apostles behaved. They weren't like cult leaders who hide secret knowledge. These guys basically gave this message to everyone, everywhere. A public, verifiable event that Jesus had rose from the grave. All right? They were actually in the city where it occurred. And they proclaimed it to hostile audiences who could challenge or refute them, yet they would not change their story. If Jesus had not actually been raised, the authorities could have easily disproven the apostles' claims by producing a body, disproving their testimony, or exposing some type of inconsistencies. But they did not do that. They were not able to. Instead, the movement of Jesus, who is the resurrection Christ, exploded precisely in the place where they should have been able to refute it easily. Number 5. If I could have you stand with me, I'm going to try and be done quickly. And can I have the band come back? Sorry, I'm going a little long, but this is important, amen? The apostles' transformation is historically striking. Not only the first four points that I've given you, but this final one. The apostles were absolutely transformed by what they knew to be absolutely true. Before the resurrection, these 11 guys at the crucifixion were fearful, disillusioned, and hiding. Peter denied Jesus with swear words. The disciples all fled and went into hiding after Jesus appeared to them, right? Their documented encounters with the risen Christ, this was how they were portrayed to the public, how literally they had been transformed. They became bold, public, unshakable witnesses for Jesus and his resurrection. They willingly confronted any and all religious and political authorities who said otherwise. Right? These 11 guys, some of who were completely unlearned, one a tax collector, right? Some of them fishermen, others just rogue dudes. Their courage is historically documented, even by non-Christian sources. It is difficult to explain this transformation without an event that they genuinely understood to be miraculous. The most historically coherent explanation is that the apostles genuinely believed that they had encountered Jesus risen from the grave. This is extremely important because we follow not just a fairy tale. We follow a historically rigorous fact that Jesus rose from the dead. And this is just one apologetic that I could offer you. The apologetic of the testimony of the apostles. The apologetic strength lies in this final point. Let me say it to you. I'll put it on the screen for you. The apostles faced death because of what they believed, and they believed it to their core. They had seen Jesus Christ risen, and no amount of pressure or threat could convince them otherwise. This sincerity, combined with their unique access to the facts, makes the resurrection of Jesus the most plausible explanation for their unwavering testimony. John chapter 3, verse 17 through 20 says this, "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because they have not believed in the name of the one and only Son of God." Jesus went on to say this, here's the verdict, the bottom line. I am the light, and the light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. It's personal, guys. That Jesus raised from the dead is a personal fact to you. If you reject it, Jesus says that you reject it because you love the darkness. You'd rather not face the truth that is verifiable. You'd rather say, yeah, I don't need that, I don't believe that, and stay in darkness, which is basically the equivalent in Scripture of death. The Apostle Paul said this, there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man, Jesus Christ. He gave himself as a ransom for all people. This has now been witnessed to at the proper time. He's talking about himself and the other 11 apostles. He goes on to write in Romans chapter 10, and Sarah spoke this same passage of Scripture before she gave her altar call today. If you, who is hearing me today, the Scriptures are speaking to you. If you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart, as the apostles did, that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, yes, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. I apologize for going a bit long today, but like I said, we did the altar call first. You've heard the gospel very clear, the good news, twice this morning. There might be some here who are still toying with the darkness. But today I've given you a very strong historical testimony and account that Jesus is exactly who he said he is. And the purpose for him doing all that he did, and those that went to their death on behalf as his ambassadors, his apostles, they are a type of proof to you that you can anchor your faith on, that Jesus is the Lord of all. Let's sing this song to him, and then we're dismissed.